Nobody in that stadium made a sound. Not the 50,000 fans who had been on their feet seconds earlier. Not the coaches who had been leaning over the dugout railing. Not the broadcasters, whose voices simply stopped mid-sentence, cut off by something that nobody had a word for yet. Because what they had just witnessed was not a baseball play. It was not a collision at the plate. It was not a hard slide. It was not the kind of aggressive, physical moment that the sport has learned to absorb and explain and move past within a news cycle. What happened in that moment, in full view of the cameras, the umpires, and every person inside that ballpark, was a punch. Directed at one man. Landing with enough force to produce a sound that the microphones picked up clearly. And the man who received it was Shohei Ohtani. The scream that followed was not the scream of a man reacting to pain alone. It was the scream of someone who had been caught completely off guard. Someone who, for one terrifying moment, did not know what had just happened to his body or what it meant for everything he had built. And then, in the silence that followed, came the words that nobody who heard them will forget. "Shohei, are you okay?" His answer, barely audible, barely a whisper, stopped everyone within range. "I feel like I'm not even alive." To understand how this moment arrived, you have to understand the game that preceded it. Ohtani had been playing with the kind of focus that his teammates have come to recognize as something different from ordinary concentration. It is a state that the people closest to him describe carefully, because they know that words tend to fall short of the reality. He was not simply locked in. He was operating in that particular mode, quiet, precise, unhurried, that signals to everyone on the field that something exceptional is being built, one pitch, one at-bat, one moment at a time. The crowd had felt it too. There is a specific electricity that fills a stadium when Ohtani is performing at that level, a collective awareness that what is happening in front of them is rare, that they are watching something that does not come along often, and that they should pay attention to every detail because these are the moments that become memories. Nobody was anticipating what came next. The play developed quickly, the way dangerous plays always do, which is why they are so difficult to prevent and so impossible to unsee. There was contact. There was a moment of confusion near the baseline. And then, in the middle of that confusion, something happened that had nothing to do with the natural chaos of baseball and everything to do with a deliberate choice made by one person in the direction of another. The punch landed on Ohtani's left side, near the ribs, near the area that any athletic trainer will immediately tell you is one of the most vulnerable regions of the human body for a player who generates rotational power through his core. The kind of area where damage does not always announce itself immediately. The kind of area where the full consequences of an impact sometimes take hours to fully reveal themselves. Ohtani went down. Not dramatically. Not theatrically. He went down the way a person goes down when their body has absorbed something it was not prepared for, a controlled descent that was somehow more alarming than a collapse would have been, because it communicated clearly that he was conscious, aware, and trying to manage something serious. The scream came approximately 4 seconds after impact. Those 4 seconds of silence, the gap between the punch and the sound, were described by everyone who was inside the stadium that night as the longest 4 seconds they had experienced in a baseball game. The umpires had frozen. The players nearest to the play had frozen. Even the opposing dugout had gone still in a way that communicated, without any words being exchanged, that everyone understood something had gone wrong. And then Ohtani screamed. It was not a prolonged scream. It was sharp, involuntary, the kind of sound that a body produces when pain arrives faster than the mind can process it. The kind of sound that carries across a quiet stadium and reaches the upper deck as clearly as it reaches the front row. Several players who were interviewed in the days following the incident described hearing that scream from positions on the field where they should not, technically, have been able to hear anything clearly over the ambient noise of a major league game. That is how quiet the stadium had become. That is how complete the collective freeze was. One veteran player, a man who has been in professional baseball for more than a decade and who has seen virtually every kind of physical incident the sport can produce, said simply that the sound Ohtani made was unlike anything he had heard in a game. Not because of its volume. Because of what was in it. Panic. That was the word he used. He said that what he heard in Ohtani's scream was not just pain. It was panic. And coming from Ohtani, from a man whose composure under pressure has become one of the defining characteristics of his public identity, that panic communicated something that statistics and medical reports cannot fully capture. The teammates who reached Ohtani first were there within seconds. What they found was a man who was conscious, who was responsive, who was trying, with the same discipline that defines every other aspect of his professional life, to assess what had happened to his own body and communicate it accurately. He was not performing. He was not dramatizing. He was, even in that moment, trying to be precise. The question came quickly, from the teammate who knelt beside him first. "Shohei, are you okay?" There was a pause. Not a long pause. But long enough. And then Ohtani said it. Quietly, clearly, in a tone that the teammate who heard it later described as more frightening than any loud expression of pain could have been. "I feel like I'm not even alive." Those words spread through the dugout within minutes. By the time the medical staff had reached the field and begun their initial assessment, everyone in both dugouts had heard some version of what Ohtani had said. By the time the game had been officially suspended, a decision that came swiftly, because no one in a position of authority was willing to continue under these circumstances, those words were already being repeated in the press box, in the broadcast booth, and in the corridors beneath the stadium where reporters were scrambling for any confirmed information they could find. What did he mean? The medical interpretation, offered carefully by professionals who were not present but who were responding to the description of the impact and the reported symptoms, is that Ohtani may have been describing a dissociative response to acute physical trauma, the sensation, common in high-impact injuries, that the body and the mind have briefly separated from each other. That the self has become a spectator to its own suffering rather than the person experiencing it. That interpretation is clinical. It is accurate. It is also, in some ways, more disturbing than the alternative explanation, which is simply that the pain was so severe that Ohtani could not find a more precise way to describe what was happening inside his body. Either way, the words landed with the weight of something that could not be walked back, explained away, or contextualized into something less serious. The manager was on the field within 30 seconds of the incident. What followed was not the careful, measured communication of a normal injury timeout. It was urgent. It was focused. And it involved, within the first 2 minutes, a decision to bypass the standard on-field medical evaluation timeline and escalate directly to the most comprehensive assessment available. That decision alone communicated the severity of what the medical staff was observing. Players on both sides of the field had removed their caps. Not as a formal gesture. Not as something coordinated or organized. It was instinctive, the kind of response that players describe as coming from somewhere that is not quite thought, not quite habit, but something in between. A recognition that what was happening on that field had moved beyond the normal boundaries of competition. The opposing manager, standing in his dugout, did not speak. He watched. His expression, captured in photographs that circulated widely in the hours after the game, was the expression of a man who was processing something that he had not anticipated and was not certain how to respond to. Several of his players had turned away from the field entirely. The umpires convened near home plate and communicated with league officials through the standard protocol. The conversation, according to people with knowledge of what was discussed, was brief and decisive. The game would not continue. Not tonight. Not under these circumstances. The announcement came over the public address system approximately 11 minutes after the incident. By that point, most of the crowd was already standing, not cheering, not protesting, just standing, in the instinctive way that people stand when something has happened that they do not yet have a framework for understanding. The league office began its formal review within hours of the incident. The footage available was extensive. Multiple camera angles, including broadcast cameras and the supplementary angles that the league captures for its own review purposes, provided a clear and comprehensive picture of exactly what had occurred and exactly who was responsible. What the footage showed was not ambiguous. The individual responsible for the punch had made a deliberate movement, not an incidental contact, not a collision that could be explained by the natural chaos of a baseball play in progress, but a targeted, intentional physical act directed at Ohtani. The review panel, working through the night, reached its preliminary conclusion before dawn. The word that appeared in the official documentation, according to sources familiar with the review process, was assault. Not interference. Not misconduct. Assault. That word carries specific weight in the context of professional sports governance. It triggers a different level of response, a different set of procedures, and a different category of potential consequence than the standard disciplinary framework that governs on-field incidents. It also opens a door that the league has historically been reluctant to approach, to involvement by parties outside the sport itself. The Players' Association was notified. Legal counsel on both sides was engaged. The timeline for a formal ruling was set, but under the circumstances, everyone involved understood that the pressure to act quickly and decisively was unlike anything the current administration had faced before. This was not a hard slide. This was not a brushback pitch. This was not any of the 100 forms of aggressive play that baseball has developed customs and traditions for managing. This was something else entirely. And the sport knew it. In the hours after the incident, Ohtani did not speak publicly. This was not surprising to the people who know him well. Ohtani's relationship with public communication has always been characterized by precision and intention. He does not speak when he does not have something specific to say. He does not perform emotions for an audience. He does not give the cameras what they are looking for simply because the cameras are pointing at him. But his silence in this particular period carried a different quality than his usual restraint. Those close to him described him as focused, not withdrawn, not distressed in the way that the public narrative was beginning to suggest, but focused in the specific, internal way that he gets when he is processing something important and deciding how to respond to it on his own terms rather than on anyone else's. One person with direct access to the situation in those hours said simply that Ohtani was asking the same question that he always asks when something disrupts his routine. Not what happened. Not who is responsible. Not what will the consequences be. His question was, what do I do next? That question, that forward orientation, is perhaps the most revealing thing about who Ohtani is at his core. The incident had been violent, unexpected, and deeply unsettling to everyone around him. His body had been targeted in a way that no professional athlete should have to experience. He had said words, in a moment of raw physical distress, that communicated a level of vulnerability that the public had never previously heard from him. And yet, within hours, his focus had already shifted to the next thing. Not because he was dismissing what had happened, but because moving forward is simply the only direction he knows how to move. The incident has exposed something that the sport has been slow to confront. The physical safety of players at the elite level of professional baseball is protected by rules, by customs, by an informal culture of mutual respect that most players internalize early in their careers. That system works, until it doesn't. Until someone decides, for whatever reason, that the rules and customs and culture do not apply to them in a particular moment. When that happens to an ordinary player, the sport absorbs it. It disciplines, it documents, it moves on. The incident becomes a footnote. When it happens to Ohtani, it cannot be a footnote. Because Ohtani is not a footnote. He is the headline, of the sport, of the era, of the entire global conversation about what baseball is and what it can become. The league's response to this incident will be read as a statement about that conversation. A statement about who baseball protects, how fiercely it protects them, and what it is willing to do when protection fails. The ruling is coming. The consequences are coming. What they look like will tell us everything we need to know about whether the sport has understood the gravity of what happened on that field, and whether it is prepared to make certain it never happens again. Ohtani will return. Of that, no one who knows him has any doubt.